Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Shannon and this is Wine, Tea, and Paper, and I talk about books here. If you've seen my more recent videos, you can see that I kind of took some time off from YouTube. And then I went back through my videos and I was like, okay, so what was the last wrap-up video that I posted? So then I can just go from the last video to now. And then I looked and I realized that I haven't posted a single wrap-up video for 2020. So I have to talk about every book that I've read since the new year started. Why did I do this to myself? I'm just gonna go ahead and talk pretty briefly about the books that I read since the beginning of the new year. There are 20 books that I'm going to be talking about, so you might want to grab yourself a drink, a comfy blanket, a sweater, lay back, sit down. It's gonna be a while. Regretting You by Colleen Hoover. I actually started reading this book back in October of 2019, but when I picked it up, it just wasn't what I wanted when I picked it up. I gave Regretting You 5 stars. I actually really liked this book. I like the style that Colleen Hoover writes in. I've talked about this at length before, but she writes contemporary books that have like a dash of romance in them. I like that because romance is the second genre and not the first genre. I really dislike books that romance is the first genre to classify the book. It's about a mother and her daughter. They're kind of both going through some changes in their lives. So the mother's husband and the daughter's father, he died unexpectedly and they don't really know exactly how it happened. At the same time, the mother's sister also died. They were in the same car accident. It's very tragic. Like the whole family is just completely like grieving. It's so terrible that they lost both of these people at the same time in their lives. The mother is kind of experimenting with a new relationship. We get like the backstory of this relationship from previous years, like before she had her daughter, which is the other character in the story. I gave this book 5 stars because it gave me that reaction. I actually cried when I was reading this book. I was actually reading this book when I was at my boyfriend at the time's house. I actually had to put it down and go seek him out to be consoled because I was very upset with what was happening. I really enjoyed this book. I always enjoy Colleen's books. Her writing style is fantastic. I really recommend her books, this book in general, to people that are new to Colleen Hoover, or you want to try the genre, or you want something that has a little bit of romance but also some like harder hitting topics in it. Like this one, for example, has like death and grieving and family dynamics. The Wives by Tarryn Fisher. I picked this up from Book of the Month. If you guys are interested, as always, I have a link for my Book of the Month referral in the description. I believe you get your first book for $9.99, but it's a pretty good deal. I love getting their books. I get them every month. But anyways, that was a side tangent, but this book is a thriller mystery. I gave this book 4 stars. The more I like think about this book, it's kind of like 3.5, 4 stars. I didn't like some of the things that were in this book. So basically, the main character in this book, her name is Thursday. She is married to her husband. Apparently her husband has 2 other wives. The 3 wives don't really know about each other, but Thursday knows that the other 2 exist. They call them like Monday and Tuesday, I think. The husband works in the city but also travels to see Thursday and then sees the other wives in the city when he's working there. So they have this arrangement and they see each other once or twice a week. Thursday gets curious about the other 2 wives. She kind of starts snooping around and she finds out some hints that lead her to information about the other 2 wives. And what she uncovers kind of makes her rethink this whole situation. There's a lot of mental illness topics in this book. The narrator, Thursday, she becomes pretty unreliable, I would say, as a narrator, and I really like unreliable narrators in a story. But I don't like how the other characters in the book treated Thursday when her mental illnesses came to light. That really turned me off to this book, and that's why I knocked some stars off. I didn't like how it was handled. I did not like the ending. If you are into this kind of unreliable, psychological, mental illness topics, you might like this book, but as you guys know, those topics are things that I like to read about, things I like to talk about, and I did not like this, so take that as you will. If you don't know the words, by Bianca Marais, something like that. This is a book that I typically would not pick up. It is a historical fiction novel. It's in South Africa, Johannesburg. There is a little girl, Robin. She's a little white girl in South Africa, and she lives there with her parents. Her father works in the coal mines. He's like one of the people that are in charge, and well, not the coal mines, I think they're diamond mines, gold mines, something like that. This isn't a spoiler. This happens pretty early on in the book. Robin's parents pass away, and she has to go live with her aunt. She's young, she doesn't really understand what's going on, and there's like riots going on in South Africa. It is also apartheid. That means that things are being like censored. The media, what they can consume, the news, everything's being censored. And this is mentioned throughout the book. When Robin's aunt is listening to music, she talks about how like they can't play it too loud because it's under apartheid, and like if people heard her playing that music. And then talking about like characters on stuffed animals and clothes that she has that she shouldn't have, and things like that. So it is mentioned. You get that time period, that time frame, and it's important to know that that's the setting for this book. We see Robin's side of the story, and then there's another storyline, and this is with Beauty. So she is a Black woman, and she lives in a smaller village type area, and she has 2 boys and a girl. So the girl left the village to go and live with other family because it was safer there. She was going to school. The way that Robin's portions of this book is written is so fantastic because the way that she writes it, you literally see it through like a 9-year-old's eyes. The way that she looks at things, the way she's trying to like think about things, process things, problem solve things, you see it through the eyes of a 9-year-old and not through an older narrator or through the author. And it's fantastic. It's done very, very well. And I definitely cried a lot during this book. It's very hard hitting. It's a lot of like hard topics to think about. It's just very, very good. I completely highly recommend this book to anybody, to everyone. I think everyone needs to read this book. I gave this one 5 stars. It was probably my favorite read of January, and still one of my favorite reads. Another Colleen Hoover book was It Ends With Us. Our main character, her name is Lily, and she talks about how like she is the daughter of the mayor, and like what she does is watch pretty closely because she is the mayor's daughter. So Lily and Ryle, they're our main characters. There is also some elements of domestic violence in this book, because Lily talks about how her mom was abused by her father, and she saw that growing up, so she was very cautious when she started getting into relationships. So that is an element in this book. So if that is something that is triggering for you, or if that's a sensitive topic for you, you might want to stay away from this book, because it does get mentioned throughout, and there are scenes throughout this book that include domestic violence. But this book is so completely overwhelming. It's very hard-hitting. Colleen Hoover did a fantastic job about touching on this subject that is pretty taboo and not talked about really, and happens very often. I got very emotional reading this book. I thought it was fantastic, and I gave it 5 stars. The Silent Patient. I've had this book for a long time. This was a January 2019 pick for Book of the Month. So a year later, I finally picked it up. Everyone was telling me that this book was so good and that I needed to read it. I saw that it was actually available as an audiobook on Scribe. Started listening to it on audio on my commute. This book was very good. I definitely recommend listening to the audio. The main character we have is Alicia, and her husband, not a spoiler, her husband dies. When this happens, the police come to the scene. Alicia can't talk anymore. She is the only one around that could possibly have done it or possibly know what's happening, and she's not talking. So she's not talking about her innocence or her guilt. They just put her in a psychiatric ward hospital. Our other character, our other narrator, is one of the psychotherapists at this ward that Alicia is in now, and we get this back and forth from the present and the past. So we see Alicia the days before her, like this episode or the accident, the night where her husband died, and it's kind of told through these journal entries. She's writing in her journal, and she's narrating her journal entries to us. So we're seeing like what her mindset is, what's going on around her in the days working up to the murder. And then we're seeing the other narrator, the psychotherapist, and he is talking about how like his personal life, how treating Alicia is like really important to him, and like there's some drama going on in the ward, and eventually these two storylines meet. When the twist happened, I was listening to the audiobook at work. I literally stopped what I was doing, paused the audiobook, looked up, and went, holy shit. Like, it was so mind-blowing, like what just happened. When I read a thriller like this, I'm like, my mind is constantly racing. I'm like, what happened? Who did it? I want to figure it out. And there was no freaking way I ever would have figured out what happened. Literally never. Like, it is so good. Like, I would even reread this book, even though I just read it in January. Very good. It's perfect. If you love psychological thrillers, this is super good. I kind of compare this to like a Peter Swanson novel. Very good. Highly recommend it. 5 stars. Go figure, I have another Colleen Hoover book on this list. I read a lot of them early this year. This is Ugly Love. I actually didn't like this one as much as I liked the other ones. Wow, my friends that read this book were gushing over it, and I just didn't see the appeal. I don't know. I gave it a 4 star. I didn't like it as much as the other ones. Our main character, her name's Tate. She moves in to live with her brother. While she's living with her brother, she gets to meet some of her brother's friends, one of them being Miles. Her brother and her brother's friends, they're all airline pilots. They kind of like hate each other. They can't deny the like chemistry that they have between each other, and it's pretty taboo because it is her brother's best friend. We get some of Miles' backstory, and it's written in poetry. It has to do with a girl that he loved before. We see the character of Miles as he is like currently, and he's very against like being in love, being in relationships because of something that happened with this girl that his sections are written about. I've been thinking a lot about why those sections are written in poetry. When we first have this meeting with Miles and this girl that he has fallen in love with, and something terrible has happened and we don't know what it is. When he sees her for the first time, the writing switches from normal like prose to poetry. I think that happens because normal words, normal sentences can't describe how he feels about her, the feelings that he has towards her. So he has to write his feelings, his thoughts in poems. And that's what I think. I liked Miles' part of the story more than I liked Miles and Tate's part of the story. If the book was literally just about Miles and this girl that this thing happened to and we find out about, and that was soul crushing, and if it was just about that, I think I would have liked that more than the Tate, Miles, and then this extra story on the side. But I still enjoyed it. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars, but I think I would have gave it 5 stars if it was just the story of Miles and the previous girlfriend where this tragic thing happened. I read The God Game, and I received this advanced reading copy from St. Martin's Press, and I was very, very excited to receive this book. It was one of my most anticipated reads of 2020. I rated this 4 stars to 4.5 stars. This book is YA, dark thriller, kind of sci-fi. So our main character, his name is Charlie. The friend stumbles across this thing called the God Game. So they're chatting with God, like an I Am Messenger kind of thing. They end up deciding to join, but they're going to join with the rest of their friend group. Their friend group is called the Vindicators. They like to pull pranks. They decide that it's a great idea to do it all together. So they gather one night and they all enter the God game. The God game decides that to make them worthy, they have to do some kind of task. They end up doing that task. They're successful. They don't get caught. And then they actually get the invitation and they are entered into this game. I would say probably a third of the way into the book, it really starts to get going. They have to keep doing these strange tasks, and it seems that they're not the only ones playing, and then they kind of run into other players that are playing this game. They realize that they don't want to play this game anymore, that their lives are almost on the line, that their futures are on the line, and they can't quit. That's basically where I'm gonna leave that at. I did like this book. It was kind of like an evil and dark version of Ready Player One. I would be interested in seeing other books that are like this, that have like this video game, AI related kind of topic. So if you know any other books that are similar to that, leave them in the comments down below and I'll try to find them and give them a read, because I did like this. I just haven't read a lot of books with topics like this, and I would be interested to read more. Then I read The Prize Girl. This was one of my most anticipated books for 2020. I saw this book on NetGalley. This is a mystery thriller, not a spoiler. It opens up right away at Jenny's funeral, so you know that something terrible happened. You can guess that that is what we're going to be trying to figure out what happened. Our main character and our narrator, her name is Virginia, and she is Jenny's half-sister. Virginia is trying to figure out what happened to her sister, and she kind of takes it upon herself to start like questioning people that Jenny was around in the days leading up to her murder. As the storyline goes on, we learn more about Virginia's past and Virginia and Jenny's past. This is where I kind of started to dislike this book, because you think that this book is going to be about solving and avenging her sister's murder, and then it kind of ends up turning into like Virginia fixing her past. Virginia's past keeps coming back to and haunting her, and it's like every time she starts to go down a path to find out what happens to Jenny, her past comes and like stops her, and like her past is always getting in the way. Virginia's literally like all over the place. I'm an older sister. I am the eldest of 5. As the eldest of 5, I would literally do anything in my power to figure out what happened to one of my siblings. And Virginia just doesn't have that drive. Even though Jenny's only her half sibling, like their relationship is so strange and so bizarre that like the fact that Virginia's even doing this doesn't make sense to me. Whole idea of this half-sister, the main narrator of the story, going through all of this trouble to figure out what happened to Jenny is bizarre, because their relationship is bizarre. So like, why would she even bother doing this if they didn't even really know each other? And then the ending is just so freaking bizarre. It just gets weirder and stranger as the book goes on. When the ending happened, I was like, you have to be freaking kidding me. This cannot be how this ends. And it was. That's how it ended, and I can't. Instead of Virginia like figuring out what this tragic thing that happened to her family, she literally just rips her family apart even more. Like, it's awful. I could not. I gave it 3 stars because I finished the book. And then I listened to Baby Teeth by Zoe Stage. This is horror fiction. I haven't really read horror ever. The concept of this book I thought was pretty interesting. This book is about a little girl named Hannah. She's like old enough to talk in this book, but she doesn't talk. But she like communicates to her parents in other ways. Apparently, Hannah does not like her mom. She thinks that her mom is in the way of her dad's love. And when she has to spend time with her mom, she acts like a devil. Little Hannah is trying to ultimately kill her mother. You're questioning both of the narrators. Our two sources of information is this toddler and then this mom that we're questioning her mental sanity too. It's pretty brilliant the way it's done, but I did not like the last portion of the book. I feel like it was working up to this crazy thing, like this moment. It got there and then it just kind of like tumbled off a cliff. That is why I ended up rating this book 3.5 stars, because I did really enjoy it. It was pretty shocking. It was done pretty well for being told from a young girl's perspective that can't talk. So this was like in the line of a bunch of terrible books that I read like back to back to back, and I was pretty upset of the way that how this was happening. I received a copy of Hook and Crown by Nicole Knapp. I received this from the publisher, the Parliament House Publishing, as an audiobook. This is a like Peter Pan retelling. I wanted to DNF this book so bad. I was listening to this book and like everything that the main character talked about like made me cringe. The main character's name, her name is Elena, and she is moving from the United States to London because she has this really strange falling out with her boyfriend at boarding school, college, something. She is completely humiliated, so she decides to move to London with this uncle that she does not know. She does not know this uncle at freaking all. And she decides that she's going to live in this boarding school with this uncle that she doesn't know, she's never met. She gets to the boarding school and it's literally an abandoned building. She moves in and she says it smells very bad. And then there's this whole scene about her cleaning and spraying lavender Febreze everywhere. And then she just leaves. She meets one other person besides her uncle, cleans up this whole freaking house that looks like a ramshackle mess on the outside, and she flies away to Neverland with this Peter Pan character that's not Peter Pan. I think they just call him Pan. It's fantastic. She loves it. And then we never hear more about this boarding school or her uncle or like why she freaking trusted herself and her life to this place to begin with, and it's like it never freaking happened. She's supposed to be so upset because she just had this falling out with her boyfriend back at college, and then every time she's introduced to a male character, she's like, oh my gosh, he's so hot, his crooked teeth, his hair. I'm like, oh my god. So I listened to the rest of the story on 2x speed just so I can get it over with. It got weirder and weirder as the story went on. So it does kind of follow the typical Peter Pan like storyline. There's Peter Pan, there's a fairy that's kind of like Tinkerbell, and then there's kind of like a Captain Hook. Just don't read this book. Just don't. There are better retellings out there. I gave this book 2 stars because I finished it. A saving grace after my bad book streak was All the Stars and Teeth by Adalyn Grace. I received this book from a Goodreads giveaway, and I was so excited because this was the first physical book that I ever received from a Goodreads giveaway ever. This book holds a special place in my heart just because it was my first physical Goodreads giveaway. And I'm also pretty excited because I just saw the cover reveal for the sequel, and I'm definitely going to reread this book before the sequel comes out. This book was exactly what I needed after reading so many poor books back to back to back. It's a young adult fantasy. We get this character. Her name is Amora. She's training to be a high animancer. So her father is the current high animancer. The animancer basically has this forbidden blood magic, and it is their job to kind of bear the brunt of this magic that's so terrible and so powerful that they are saving their people by just having this power. The animancers are able to look into someone's soul and see if it is tainted or if it's pure. And if it's tainted, they're then able to use their blood and their bones to harm them and eventually kill them if that's what they want to do. So it's a very powerful magic. It's very brutal. There's a lot of brutal scenes in this book for a young adult book. It's very vivid, there's a lot of blood, but I really liked it. So it's really fun because a lot of the time they're on the water, they are on the ship with this pirate, and Amora kind of becomes a pirate on her own. I really enjoyed this book. I read it super quickly. I can't even stress how much I enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars, and then I had another terrible book. I had to read Sublime by Christina Lauren. And this is one of their first earlier novels. So this was published in 2014. And this is classified as a young adult paranormal romance. So when I think paranormal romance, I automatically think of Twilight. There's this male character named Colin, and he is kind of like an adrenaline junkie. He's always seeking out thrills, and he lives in this, it's like a boarding school, I guess. One day, this girl named Lucy, she walks out of the woods and she has no memory. She just remembers waking up in the woods, in the middle of the woods, and she looks different to Colin than she does to other people on campus. And he's like strangely like captivated and hypnotized by this girl. Lucy also has this strange connection to Colin, and it's really creepy. Like as soon as she sees Colin, she kind of like confronts him and says, "I'm here for you." And that is hella creepy. Like she just came crawling out of the woods and she goes up to this kid and says, "I am here for you." So like as this story continues, it turns out that Lucy isn't completely human. It's just this bizarre, toxic, like parasitic relationship. And Colin does some pretty stupid stuff that for this girl that he just met. I wanted to DNF it, but I did not DNF it because I was reading it for a buddy read and I stuck it out and I rated it 2 stars, and I only rated it 2 stars because I finished it. Again, I don't know. It was terrible, and I am very over reading these terrible books. And then I listened to Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, and I pretty enjoyed this book. I really enjoyed this book. Gideon the Ninth is creepy, but like in the best way possible. Gideon is a slave to the royal necromancer family. Kind of like put this in perspective. There are 9 houses, and each house is like on its own planet. The group of people that are on these planets, they are some type of necromancer. They can do some kind of necromancy. The 9th necromancer, her name is Harrowhark Nonagesimus. She is basically the sitting queen of the 9th house, the first house. Basically sent out an invitation that the high necromancer and their cavalier has to go and do these like trials at the first house. Something happens to the Harrowhark's cavalier. So Gideon ends up being the new cavalier. Harrowhark and Gideon go to the first house. You kind of get the sense that the 9th house is hiding something, but you don't know what it is. You don't really know a lot about these houses to begin with, so it's all very mysterious. I actually wish I would have read this book physically instead of listening to it, because there's a lot of things that I feel like I missed. I don't have a physical copy of this book, but this is a book that I can see myself rereading before I read the second one. It is the first of the Locked Tomb series. The second is Harrow the Ninth. That book is supposed to come out in August, and I'm pretty freaking excited. I rated that book 4.5 stars because, I don't know, there was a lot of information thrown at me, and like I said, I think I would have gave it 5 stars if I read it physically instead of listened to it. I read Dear Edward. This book was recommended to me multiple times by multiple people. This is just not a genre that I read. This is literally just contemporary. Like nothing else going on. It's just a contemporary novel. Kind of takes you through hour by hour almost of this day. You know what happens, and you know like what is leading this story is leading up to. Edward is the only person that survives a plane crash. He's literally the only survivor, and he suffers from survivor's guilt. He feels very guilty that he's the one that survived, not his parents, not his brother, not these other people. That's a lot for a child. This story is a combination of what happened, the moments leading up to the accident, and what is going on now. The aftermath that Edward is dealing with, the aftermath that his aunt and his uncle are dealing with, taking him in. And it's just, this is literally just a story of grief. It can be pretty heavy because it's just, the whole story is just so sad and tragic. He's very upset that he has to live with the memories of his mom, of his dad, of his brother, and they're not there. And he is the one that survived, and he is the one that's still there, and he feels very terrible about this. It took me a long time to read this book because it is very heavy. It's not like a fast readable book. There's a lot that you have to process, a lot that you have to chug through. It's like a weight that you're putting on your shoulders reading this book, but it's worth it. It's a good book. I gave it 4 stars. It was not my favorite, and I think it's just because I don't like contemporary. I listened to The One by John Mars. I heard about this book from Books and Lala on booktube, and this is like a sci-fi thriller. It's kind of like dating in the future. So you take a DNA test similar to like 23andMe or Ancestry.com. This DNA test will match you with your DNA partner. So like who you are destined to be together based on your DNA and chemical makeup. We get the storylines of multiple different people who have either not taken the test or have taken the test, or the partners of people have taken the test. And it kind of like each chapter is a different person. 5 very different people have received the notification that they've been matched. Storyline progresses from like being matched to getting to know your match, and then like what happens because of that. It was pretty crazy to listen to it because each person was a different voice. I rated it 4 stars. I really liked it. I don't really have any more thoughts on it other than that, which is hilarious because I rated it a 4-star. I read Anyone by Charles Soule. Harper Perennial sent me this finished copy of the book. I thought that was super nice of them because I actually asked for an... The concept is pretty cool. So it goes back and forth between this like scientist who is trying to create a cure for Alzheimer's. But she actually doesn't find a cure for Alzheimer's. She actually invents something else. And it's a technology that ends up becoming Anyone, but it's spelled N-E-O-N-E, like N-E-1. And this allows a person to be like someone's consciousness to be removed and put into somebody else's body. And then that person's consciousness is unaware of what's going on. And then the person's body whose consciousness was moved, their body is just kind of like in a coma almost. The person gets transported into this other body. They do whatever, and then they're transported back in their body. And then the host has no idea what happened during that period of time. That's basically what this is about. There's a lot of like political elements because this is a new technology. You get some people that are like, this is terrible. We shouldn't have the right to allow people into other people's bodies. And then everyone wants to control this power because it's such like a strange technology that can be harnessed for good and bad. And we kind of see that. We see the good, it's the one net, and then we see the bad. It's called a dark share because certain people aren't allowed to do the flash, which is what it's called, to be transferred from your body to another body for a period of time. So some people, they have either heart defects or they're too old and they don't want you to flash. So there's a lot of like legal issues in here, the idea of like whose invention it was, and there's a lot of drama. It was just very, very good. I loved it. I haven't read a science fiction book in a long time, but I rated this book 4 stars, and I'm definitely going to be reading more books like this in the future. Next, I listened to The Arrangement by Robin Harding. I got the idea that I wanted to read this book because I watched V Reads. She did a review of this book and it sounded pretty interesting. Something that I haven't read before. This is a thriller mystery book. It's about sugar babies. So the concept of sugar babies is pretty interesting because it's so taboo. So a sugar baby is a young, attractive girl who has a sugar daddy. So the sugar daddy would pay the sugar baby for her time, and that could be her time that she just spends with him. Like they could go out to dinner and he would pay her $500, also buying her dinner. could hang out with her. And sometimes these men want sexual relationships with these sugar babies. And then they also pay, and then if they like you, you would make an arrangement with your sugar daddy. So this would mean like, I see you 3 times a week and I give you an allowance of $3,000 a month or something like that. The main character, her name is Natalie. She kind of gets introduced to the sugar baby lifestyle from her one friend in her art class, I believe. She goes on this, it's kind of like Tinder, but for sugar daddies and sugar babies to meet. She meets this man and his name is Gabe. He's married, he has children, and he is a finance attorney. They start meeting and they make an arrangement. Natalie thinks it's fantastic. She thinks that she is in love with her sugar daddy. She kind of gets this crazy obsession going. I thought it was super cringy that she went from completely doubting this whole lifestyle to being completely immersed and obsessed with this older man that she thought was disgusting to begin with. The ending, however, I did like. I think that was its saving grace. I never would have suspected that ending. I definitely thought like a million different things, and none of them are right. So I gave this book 3 stars because the ending completely wowed me. So talking about hard-hitting stories. This is a nonfiction book called The Only Plane in the Sky, The Oral History of 9/11. I actually started listening to this book when the pandemic started happening, which is pretty crazy because I felt like because I read this book at the same time that this global pandemic was happening, a lot of the topics and things that were being talked about in this book were going on around me. National panic when 9/11 happened, and there's a lot of information spreading fast. They're not really sure like what's actually real, if there are like 100 planes that are being hijacked, if there's like 2 planes being hijacked, if the hijack wasn't even a hijack. Right now you hear people's stories about loved ones, family members, and coworkers that are being affected by coronavirus and how their stories are touching your heart. And then I was listening to these and about how that's touching my heart. It was very overwhelming in a sense. The audiobook was done so well because each story is narrated by a different person. And it's so powerful because you feel like you're actually listening to that person's story. Listening to it right now in this mindset, in this environment that we are currently in, I think it was even more hard-hitting than it would have been if I read it last year. I would absolutely recommend this book to anyone. It is just so fabulous, and if you haven't read this book, you really need to. It doesn't even go without saying that I loved this book and I gave it 5 stars. I listened to The Long Bright River. This is a mystery fiction book, and I really thought I was going to enjoy this book because it has undertones of the heroin epidemic, and it takes place in Pennsylvania. This is in a location that I'm kind of familiar with. This is an epidemic that I am familiar with because I did extensive research on the heroin epidemic in Pennsylvania for my senior project for college. Thought I was really going to enjoy this book, and I actually didn't. I gave this book 3 stars. A lot of the time I was zoning out listening to it because I just did not like the storyline. I didn't like some of the characters, and I couldn't focus on it. Okay, but this is the most recent book that I read, The Boy from the Woods by Harlan Coben. It's listed mystery thriller, but I would say more mystery suspense. There's a lot of police investigation in here. 2 of the characters are lawyers. I have a lot of questions about this book. Some later parts in the book did answer some of my questions, but then I had more questions after that. There are some twists, but I feel like there were too many like reveals, twists at the same time. I feel like it didn't need to have all of those happening at once. I'm going to go into detail about this book in a separate video, but I'm just going to talk about a little bit about the synopsis, and then I'll leave my thoughts to the book review, and you can look at that at another time. So this book, it opens up on like a news article about this boy that was found in the woods. And then we learn that this boy doesn't have any parents. There's like a mystery about why this boy was even in the woods, and they end up calling him Wild. So Wild has no memories of his life before the woods, so he is very knowledgeable, and he doesn't really trust a lot of people. But there's a girl that goes missing. Her name is Naomi. So this book is pretty, like, the title is pretty misleading because it's called The Boy from the Woods, but it's really about a girl that goes missing. Then another boy goes missing, and there is speculation that the girl and this boy team up and they're missing together. The Hester's grandson kind of gets tied up in this, like he knows something bad has happened, but he doesn't really know what's happened. He knows that this girl was bullied. He thinks there's something malicious going on, and then we get some of Wild's like side stories, and then there's a lot of characters thrown in. It's pretty politically charged somehow, but overall I thought it was a pretty good book. I rated it 3.5 stars, but I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads. I just feel like there was a lot packed into one novel. I almost feel like this could have been split into 2, and then the author could have explained things some more, because I feel like this is supposed to be about Wild, but it really wasn't. It's about this other girl and her mysterious upbringing. So that was my lengthy wrap-up video from January 1st until April 30th. How many days were in April? I don't even know. Every day is the same anymore. I can't believe I went that long without making a wrap-up video, and that will never happen again. So I am sorry that this video is so long. Thanks for sticking around if you watched this whole freaking thing. If you did, why don't you leave an emoji in the comments so I can see if you guys stuck around the whole time or if I'm just talking to nobody on the internet. Till next time, thank you, and I will see you later.